Well, hello everyone. I'm John Turkington, and sitting beside me is my glamorous assistant, Sylvia, otherwise known as my wife, and she's going to help me with the various readings we'll hear. The last time I gave this talk, I was actually on the sea on Christmas Day, and amazingly, there were people there to listen to it on the Viking ship. And I've been with Viking Ocean from when it first started. So we've done a lot of travelling round and we've enjoyed every minute. I personally think Viking is so good that for me and Sylvia, it can't be bettered. And since starting with Viking, we haven't sailed with anyone else at all. So here we are. Glad to be able to offer a Christmas talk and hope that you thoroughly enjoy it. And we'll go on to the first slide. Christmas at sea. This is like an old-fashioned annual that has little bits in about this, that and the other. So don't expect a continuous narrative. The photo is one I took in Puerto Rico. All right, so start at this slide. Righto. Right, Christmas at sea. This photograph, which is rather strange, we took in Puerto Rico. We were there just after Christmas, going around the Caribbean, just after the hurricane season had devastated the place, and the ship was being packed up after Christmas. So this poor reindeer, oh, but he's got his head exposed. He's waiting to be put away into storage. So let's go on with our annual. Food and drink. I split it up into sections. And this one I like because you can imagine this is from the Queen Mary, it's pre-war, pre-Second World War. And it's a menu that was part of an exhibition in Liverpool at the Maritime Museum, which is a wonderful museum, and it was actually called Christmas at Sea. I think it illustrates quite nicely what we used to think of children's food. You look at the menu, everything is sweet. Peaches, custard, Christmas cake, iced lollies, fresh fruit. Man, there's something healthy there, isn't there? So our attitudes to children have certainly changed. Where we don't change so much is attitudes to adults and Christmas and what we have for dinner. These two menus appeal to me. They're from the same exhibition in Liverpool. One is from a ship right at the start of its career, and one is from the very end of its career. But the one on the left, the SS Patroclus, this was its maiden voyage. And there's its Christmas Day menu, looking very, very posh, very well presented. The ship itself is underneath, and that's a postcard of it. It was based in Liverpool. The one on the right was at the end of its career, the SS Jekyll. It had had various names. It was built in the First World War as a warship, had been sold on afterwards and sold on, and ended up with the African Steamship Company. Their menu, handwritten, not overly well spelt in places, but if you can see, it's exactly the same menu as you will get on the Patroclus 30 years later. They both start with tomato soup, they both have braised York ham, both have turkey, both have petit pois. It's exactly the same. But Christmas customs, Christmas menus, they don't change, even if the circumstances can change enormously. And here's an enormous change of circumstance. I took this shot in the Explorer's Lounge on one of the Viking ships. It's a ship called the Fram. It was built to withstand tremendous force of ice pressure. The idea was that it would be sailed into the polar ice, get trapped in the ice, and drift with it, which was meant to be trapped. The person who was in charge of the expedition was a great, really great Norwegian explorer, Fridtjof Nansen. There he is, sitting in the snow, 1894, beside the Fram. There's still a bit of open water, just to prove he's on the sea. And he spent a few Christmases on the Fram. There's the banner with some of his crew, and he liked to treat them at Christmas. They had special food, which wasn't wonderful, but special food. But most of all, he liked to give them a special drink. This he counted as his speciality. He made a different one each Christmas he was out. And I wonder if you can work out what this one is. He spent all day brewing this. It's made of spirits of wine, cloudberry jam, water, and baking powder. He says it went down really well with the crew. When you read some of the crew's accounts, that's not quite exactly what they think. But if you mix all these together, a great deal of skill, you end up with polar champagne, 83 degrees. The 83 degrees is because he was 83 degrees north. So, champagne recipe. If you run out, that's all you need. Another ship stuck in the ice. Again, polar regions. That ship is the Endurance with Shackleton. Shackleton was the leader of the expedition. Thomas Ord Lees, whose name's there at the top of the screen, he was one of the officers on the ship. At Christmas, he was delighted to see that Shackleton issued all the men with an extra ration of spirits of grog, but not a big ration. He was worried that if they drank too much, they'd become too boisterous and it wouldn't fit in with the spirit of the day. He had a sort of downer on a section of the crew. And here's Sylvia with the first of her readings about this.
New Year. The Scotch members insisted on singing Auld Lang Syne at midnight and woke us all up, as all the respectable members had retired. But Scotchmen are always a nuisance at New Year and never have voices worth speaking of.
Thank you. That photograph I showed you of the Fram is, you can see actually in the Explorers Lounge, plus a lot of other the memorabilia about these polar explorers. So I can recommend it to you. Now, this chap, Captain George Vancouver, again, English, an English sailor, he was sent out to Alaska. A couple of jobs. One was to try to find the Northwest Passage. Another was to map the whole area because it hadn't been accurately mapped. And a third one, which perhaps the most important, was to try to avoid a third world war with Spain. And thanks to his negotiating skills, that war was avoided, even though the English fleet was stood up in readiness, and it would have been a genuinely worldwide war. But he was successful. Whether you've heard of him or not, I don't know, but you'll have heard of the city named after him, because Vancouver is named after him. This is it when we were there last, basking in the sunshine. All the photographs, by the way, are mine, apart from one as we go through. So as we sailed up and down Alaska, we knew, well, we had every faith that the captain knew where he was going. But Vancouver didn't. He had to map it all as he went, measured, took directions, and he went to up and down the coast. This is Icy Point, by the way. This is dawn. It isn't sunset. Dawn rise over Icy Point. And he spent 4 years in this area. When the winters came in, the weather became so bad that he just couldn't stay there. He couldn't do his job. mainly because it was so foggy. So every winter, and hence every Christmas, he set sail away from Alaska, and usually he went across to Hawaii, lovely place to spend Christmas. But on this occasion, which I'm going to tell you about, he'd sailed south to California, which was in Spanish hands in those times. There he took on fresh provisions, fresh meat, fresh water, and then he cut across the ocean to go to the Galapagos Islands. Christmas Day that year was an absolute beauty. It was warm, there was a light breeze. The sea, he says in his journal, was full of turtles, and you could literally reach from the ship and pick one up for your meal. And turtle meat was apparently delicious, as was the soup. So on Christmas Day, his men sat down, and his officers, they sat down to a feast of fresh meat, seafood, turtle soup, an extra ration of drink, and a wonderful time was had by all. Vancouver was noted for being one of the very, very few captains who got his crew safely back from their voyage without losing anyone to illness. Food was important to him, and at Christmas particularly. I would think the crew, the actual men, were glad to be at sea for this Christmas, because when they were in Hawaii at Christmas, they were never allowed ashore. The officers were, but they weren't. So this Christmas Day, for them, a beauty. Richard H. Dana, 2 years before the mast, a bestseller. If you haven't read it, I can recommend it to you. It's written like a diary. His first Christmas wasn't like that of Vancouver's men, and his second was slightly different. He'd embarked on a ship that worked with cowhides. They went from California, they picked up cowhides and shipped them around the Americas. And that illustration is from one of the early editions of the book. It shows the men bringing the cowhides, and how stiff they are, onto a rowing boat to take to the ship. And Sylvia's going to read you about his first Christmas.
Thursday, December the 25th, Southern Hemisphere. This day was Christmas, but it brought us no holiday. The only change was that we had a plum duff for dinner, and the crew quarrelled with the steward because he did not give us our usual allowance of molasses to eat with it. He thought the plums would be a substitute for the molasses, but we were not to be cheated out of our rights this way.
His second Christmas was, apart from the food, slightly different.
This day was Christmas, and as it rained all day long, and there were no hides to take in, and nothing special to do, the captain gave us a holiday, the first we had had since leaving Boston, and plum duff for dinner.
This next section says, like an annual, is the talk. I've skipped from to different subjects. Best wishes. This is all to do with messages from the British royal family. This is one of the first ones that was sent out. This is a First World War one. It went out not over the wireless, but as a telegram, which had to be then copied out on the ships as they were received and read out by the captain of the ship. This was partly for security reasons, so that the German submarines couldn't track them, and partly because any other method wouldn't work. It's the first of many, many Christmas greetings. At this festival of peace, in the midst of a world at war, I send you greetings and pray in the old familiar words that you and the ships in which you serve may return in safety to enjoy the blessing of the land and the fruits of your labours. That's George V. And here he is, making the first real broadcast 1932, the first Christmas broadcast. Part of what he said. His speech was written by Rudyard Kipling, the poet. I speak now from my home and from my heart to you all, to men and women so cut off by the snows, the desert or the sea, that only voices out of the air can reach them, to those cut off from fuller life by blindness, sickness or infirmity, and to those who are celebrating this day with their children and grandchildren. To all, to each, I wish a happy Christmas. God bless you. George VI, the next king, but yet another war. He broadcast the Christmas message, and that photograph of him is posed afterwards. That isn't him reading it, because he was a very nervous speaker. And the desk that he read from was covered in blankets, apparently, so that you couldn't hear his clothes, his hands shaking and drumming against the desk. It was to keep him quiet. But here's a little of what he said.
We look with pride and thankfulness on the never-failing courage and devotion of the Royal Navy, upon which throughout the last 4 months has burst the storm of ruthless and unceasing war. And when I speak of our Navy today, I mean all the men of our empire who go down to the sea in ships, the mercantile marine, the minesweepers, the trawlers and drifters, from the senior officers to the last boy who has joined up. To everyone in this great fleet, I send a message of gratitude and greeting from myself as from all my peoples.
1956, the Royal Yacht Britannia, and aboard it is Prince Philip, the Queen's husband. She is not there, she's in London, he is in Antarctica, and he broadcasts from the ship, wishing everyone the best and making various philosophical remarks. The Queen replied,
To him I say, from all the members of the family gathered here today, our very best good wishes go out to you and to everyone on board Britannia as you voyage together in the far southern seas. Happy Christmas from us all.
And the first time the Queen was seen on television giving her again her Christmas broadcast was 1957.
Happy Christmas. 25 years ago, my grandfather broadcast the first of these Christmas messages. Today is another landmark because television has made it possible for many of you to see me in your homes on Christmas Day. My own family often gather round to watch television, as they are this moment, and that is how I imagine you now. Today, we need a special kind of courage, not the kind needed in battle, but a kind which makes us stand up for everything that we know is right, everything that is true and honest. We need the kind of courage that can withstand the subtle corruption of the cynics, so that we can show the world that we are not afraid of the future. I hope that 1958 may bring you God's blessings and all the things you long for. And so I wish you all, young and old, wherever you may be, all the fun and enjoyment and the peace of a very happy Christmas.
In good spirit, entertainment at sea. One of the greatest of all entertainers, Bob Hope. He had a series of Christmas shows for the troops, for the American troops. And one of them was given at sea on an aircraft carrier, the Coral Sea. He flew in, made a great entrance, brought with him his co-stars. You can see Raquel Welch there in the middle, and he was greeted rapturously by the crowds, and quite rightly too, a very, very funny man. And there's a long history of entertainment at sea. The books I've shown here, these are from the library on board one of the Viking ships. The Journal of Rochfort Maguire, and I photographed those books on the ship. He spent 2 years at Point Barrow. Point Barrow is the most northerly part of the United States, so it's the most northerly part of Alaska. He was searching, as so many people then were, for an English explorer who disappeared, Sir John Franklin. He's a very pleasant-looking man, I think, extremely pleasant. He had an entertainment laid on for him by his crew. They practiced it secretly, while he entertained the local people. On Christmas Eve, he had invited on board the local chief and his son, a young boy. The young boy lasted the entertainment for about an hour, and then he had to go home as he'd drunk so much and smoked so much he was feeling a wee bit sickly. His father stayed on for another 2 hours to enjoy carol singing and services before he staggered off home. On Christmas Day itself, all of the local people were invited to the ship. They were fed, they sang, and they went home before the play was put on. The crew had made a theatre, which they quickly erected on the deck of the ship, and what the play was, we don't know, because he doesn't tell us. He says it was the queer play. That's what he calls it. He enjoyed it, the officers enjoyed it, the men enjoyed it. Seems to have been about the food, but a real celebration of Christmas Day. In the evening, they had a special meal, the Christmas meal, obviously the plum duff, which comes up all the time. And Maguire, in his journal, typically wrote this: "It is an agreeable sight to see these rough sons of the sea sitting round the social board and as reasonable in their conduct as other people." What he expected of them, I don't know. Just as an interesting aside, HMS Resolute, same sort of period, again Franklin and whatnot, got trapped in the ice. The crew abandoned the ship. They all got back home safely. And a year or so later, the Resolute was found still trapped there by an American whaler. They managed to free it from the ice, which had thinned considerably, and they towed it to England. They gave it as a present to Queen Victoria, who, not knowing what to do with it, had it chopped up and some of its timbers made into a desk, which she sent back to America as a present for the president. Not this desk, not this one that's appeared on the news all over lately, but it was this desk, the one that's in the Oval Office. That's called the Resolute desk, and it's from the timbers of that ship rescued from the ice. Sir John Ross was the first person to discover the Northern Magnetic Pole, and he had a lovely Christmas Day, even though he was there in the ice. Here he is in his ship, working his way through, and on Christmas Day, they were pretty well stuck in the ice. But he said it was a glorious day. It started with a display of the Aurora Borealis. The men were given extra rations of drink, which was, of course, the highlight. They had plum duff, as ever. He ran up all the flags on the ship, and any spare flags he had, he put on poles round and about. In the evening, was great. And in this engraving from his book, you can see, perhaps top left-hand corner, the evening star, Venus, shining brightly over all. And he thought it was absolutely wonderful. A really good Christmas. They sang carols under the stars, and it raised the morale. And again, being a Victorian captain, he can't help commenting upon the morality of it, how good it is that it helps people keep in good moral condition to enjoy themselves. Songs, poems and stories, which is exactly what it says it is. Robert Louis Stevenson, Treasure Island, etc., etc., wrote a lot of poetry. On December the 22nd, 1888, he published Christmas at Sea in a magazine. If you weren't allowed to buy the magazine, you could probably also bought the first commercial Christmas card, because that came out at the same time. And Christmas at Sea is a poem about a man who goes away to sea, and he is struck by, and the ship, by very, very bad weather. The crew are in fear of their lives. There are cliffs nearby. They think they're going to be dashed up against the cliffs, and it is very bad weather.
The sheets were frozen hard, and they cut the naked hand. The decks were like a slide, where a seaman scarce could stand. The wind was a nor'wester, blowing squally off the sea, and cliffs and spouting breakers were the only things alee.
He looks up and he realizes he knows where he is.
The bells upon the church were rung with a mighty jovial cheer, for it's just that I should tell you how, of all days in the year, this day of our adversity was blessed Christmas morn, and the house above the coastguards was the house where I was born. Oh, well I saw the pleasant room, the pleasant faces there, my mother's silver spectacles, my father's silver hair, and well I saw the firelight, like a flight of homely elves, go dancing round the china plates that stand upon the shelves.
The sailors work hard. They manage to escape disaster, and the ship heads away to sea. All of them are happy, apart from one.
And they heaved a mighty breath, every soul on board but me, as they saw her nose again pointing handsome out to sea. But all that I could think of in the darkness and the cold was just that I was leaving home and my folks were growing old.
Christmas sentiment. Right? We all want our families, don't we? And Stevenson was no different in his poem. The Pequod. Pequod is Captain Ahab's ship where he goes after Moby Dick. The novel, one of my great favourites, written by Herman Melville, and it describes the search for the great whale and Ahab's madness. The narrator is called Ishmael. The book starts, "Call me Ishmael." And Ishmael is on the ship in Nantucket on Christmas Day, and the ship is getting ready to leave. He doesn't have a very pleasant experience of Christmas Day. Captain Ahab hasn't appeared yet, and the person in charge of the ship is somebody called Peleg, who will leave the ship eventually. This is what it says in Moby Dick. I felt a sudden sharp poke in my rear, and turning round was horrified to see the apparition of Captain Peleg in the act of withdrawing his leg from my immediate vicinity. That was my first kick. "Is that the way they heave in the merchant service?" he roared. "Spring, thou sheephead, spring and break thy backbone." At last the anchor was up, the sails were set, and off we glided It was a short, cold Christmas, and as the short northern day merged into night, we found ourselves almost broad upon the wintry ocean, whose freezing spray cased us in ice as in polished armour. This is a Burl Ives LP, and it's about the favourite carols of America's presidents. There's no, as far as I'm aware, any equivalent of favourite carols of British prime ministers or French presidents or whatever. And you can see from this that George Washington's favourite carol was While Shepherds Watched Their Flocks by Night, say, Richard Nixon, Little Drummer Boy, and so on. I know them all. I know all the tunes, I know the words, except for Christmas on the Sea, which was Theodore Roosevelt's favourite. I have tried and tried to find a copy of this LP to hear what that song is, because there are various songs called Christmas on the Sea. So if anybody does happen to know it and can get in touch with me, I'd love to know what it sounds like if you can find out. Now here's another carol, and there's going to be a little quiz here. Annuals have quizzes in them. This is I Saw Three Ships Come Sailing By. This is what it sounds like. Who was in those ships, all three? 'Twas Jesus Christ and his lady. But that carol was first printed in 1763. And there's a much older, earlier version of it, where it isn't Jesus who is in the ships. Each ship carries one skull. The three wise men. They were found in Jerusalem. They were shipped out by Helena, who was the mother of the Emperor Constantine. So she took them to Constantinople, and there they stayed for hundreds of years till they were taken to Milan, where again they had a long spell. And then the three ships are the three ships that carried the skulls of the wise men to Cologne Cathedral in Germany on the Rhine. That's Cologne Cathedral with its wonderful Christmas market. It's great, is their Christmas market. So they ended up there. In here, to be exact, on the left is the reliquary. A reliquary is just a container for relics. It's the largest in the medieval world. The three skulls are supposed to be inside there. And on the right, one of the decorative panels at the side to show the three kings. The painting on the altar in Cologne Cathedral, likewise, is the three kings, the three wise men, the three magi, whatever you want to call them, giving their gifts to the Christ child. So the three kings were in the three ships, or the skulls of them. Right, here's a quiz. This is the carol that most people know, and I wonder if you know the missing words. I'll tell you the answers at the end. There aren't many questions, so there's no need to write anything down or scrabble frantically for a pen. Oh, they sailed into, where did they sail into? So there's a photo there as a clue. And what are the missing words? All the bit on earth something, all the A in heaven, and all the S on earth. Which words are missed out? I'll show you at the end. The greatest Christmas story, apart from the biblical one, is surely by this man, Charles Dickens. He wrote it and he performed it. He performed it all over England. He performed it all over America. and these performances were always sellouts. He was a wonderful performer. He could make people cry, he could make them laugh, he could make them stand up and cheer just by standing at his desk and reading the story. And this is A Christmas Carol. It's about a miser, Ebenezer Scrooge, who is visited by various spirits who make him see the error of his ways. The one on the left is the ghost, the spirit of Christmas Present. He's the one that we'll look at. He takes Scrooge flying through the air. He takes him over mining towns, over farms, over villages, over cities, and he also takes him out to sea, going first to a lighthouse, which is bound by bad weather, by rocks, and what does he see there?
But even here, two men who watched the light had made a fire that through the loophole in the thick stone shed out a ray of brightness on the awful sea. Joining their horny hands over the rough table at which they sat, they wished each other Merry Christmas in their can of grog. And one of them, the elder two, with all his face damaged and scarred with hard weather, as the figurehead of an old ship might be, struck up a sturdy song that was like a gale in itself. Again the ghost sped on, above the black and heaving sea, on, until, being far away, as he told Scrooge, from any shore, they lighted on a ship. They stood behind the helmsman at the wheel, the lookout in the bow, the officers who had the watch, dark, ghostly figures in their several stations, but every man among them hummed a Christmas tune, or had a Christmas thought, or spoke below his breath to his companion of some bygone Christmas day.
It's a wonderful story, one of the foundations of everything we think about as Christmas. This is a sad bit, but I think that at Christmas we need to think as well of inspiration, of quality of character, of helping other people, of working for other people. And this man certainly did. The proper service. It's about Edward Wilson, who was often called Bill, Uncle Bill, because he was so reliable. An Arctic explorer, Antarctic explorer as well. He sailed with Shackleton, it's there in the top right, and he sailed with and marched with Scott of the Antarctic. He was an accomplished painter. These are some of his paintings. There are quite a few of them, really good watercolours. When he was with Shackleton, he had years of Christmases on the ice. His first one, he talks about in his journals, he talks about reading the Christmas service, the collect, in bed. He gets up and he goes for the proper service, where all the crew join in, prayers, hymns, carols. They have Christmas food. He opens his presents. One of them is a big box of sweets, which his immediate thought is, I'll keep these and I'll share them out. We'll have a few each day for each of the crew until they're all finished. His second Christmas, again, it's a good one. He talks about lying in his sleeping bag, having a special Christmas breakfast brought to him, which was mainly made up of fried seal's liver and hot sweet tea. But he enjoys it. Again, there's a service. They join in, all the men. The final Christmas that he writes about on this expedition, though, is very different. He's still lying in bed. It's the early hours of the morning when he has to get up from the ship because the ship is locked in ice. And the men are taking shifts, 4 hours on, 4 hours off. For 4 hours, they go out with ice saws, trying to cut their way through the ice. They're trying to cut a passage through the ice. They have 4 hours off. When he gets back in his sleeping bag and tries to sleep. He has 4 hours on, and on it goes all Christmas Day. And for the first time, I would think, in his life, he complains a bit. It's hot, it's noisy, it's stuffy. But he can't have been put off, because a few years later, he's back again on the ice with Scott on his expedition to be the first people to reach the South Pole. And they weren't. They'd been beaten to it. They were grossly disappointed. They had to march all the way back, knowing they'd lost, basically. They'd had camps set out with food in them, and their aim was to march back, camp to camp, picking up supplies as they went back. But it all went wrong. And the people all died together, these few folk, in a tent, not too many miles from the next source of food. Scott knew they were dying. He knew they couldn't survive. And he spent what energy he had writing letters to the wives and family of his fellow travellers, in the hope that if their bodies were found, the letters would be found, and the letters could be a consolation to the survivors. The letters were found, and this is what he wrote about Bill.
If this letter reaches you, Bill and I will have gone out together. We are very near it. I should like you to know how splendid he was at the end, everlastingly cheerful and ready to sacrifice himself for others. I can do no more to comfort you than to tell you he died as he lived, a brave, true man, the best of comrades and the staunchest of friends.
It's a wonderful thing to have said about you. And I think at Christmas, we've got to look for these other values beyond the commercial, beyond the tinsel, and think of these wonderful folk who support, help, think about others. Last Christmas, Sylvie and I spent it at sea on the Viking Sky, where we were beautifully treated by all the staff. We had a thoroughly good time of it. And these next few pictures, which is basically the end of the talk, are what we saw. We first went around the Mediterranean, and it was great because we saw all the Christmas lights, Christmas fairs. This is Cadiz, one of my favourite cities. This is Malaga, still in Spain, well decorated. A market. We spent a lot of time in Christmas markets, eyeing up the food. That's Barcelona. Marseille, to Marseille, and that's the flower market on the harbour side of Marseille at Christmas. Can you see all the different colours of the plants? Most of them were dyed. I was surprised by that. There were lots of dyed twigs and dyed trees. And you might wonder how on earth I managed to take that photograph from the roof, but I'm not going to tell you. I shall let you puzzle about. That's the Christmas puzzle. We saw the local specialities. Barcelona, this one, with these log creatures. See, there's two, it's a log, two sticks at the front to hold them up. They all have the same face. They're all dressed in the same way. And there were thousands of them. Some of them were, I can't say life-size because I don't know how big they are, but big, so you could sit on them. There were lots of families perched on them, having the photos taken. These from Marseille, little figures. And again, we counted 3 separate markets selling nothing but these. There were countless numbers of these little figures. And all the landscapes, the houses, the settings that you could put them in must have cost a fortune. But they come out at Christmas, real Christmas treat. We should have gone to the Azores, going across the Atlantic, but the weather was bad. And the captain, very wisely, decided that he'd go a wee bit further south, and we didn't have bad weather on the ship. We just avoided it. And we ended up in Madeira, which we're thoroughly glad of, because Madeira is a lovely place. Here it's outside the church in Madeira with the angels. A highlight, certainly for Sylvie and I, was to go and see Father Christmas's village with elves and gnomes and little Christmas huts that we could go into. That's Sylvia on the left in the blue coat on. It's not her on the right in costume. Nutcrackers, it was great. Centre of Madeira, decorations all over. And this was odd. This was odd because there was a wonderful scene set round a pool. This isn't Madeira, by the way. And we've got the ox and the ass in the stable, perhaps a Joseph figure. But, you know, there was a cafe just beside them with those two sitting there. I thought, what a bizarre contrast between the religious, pretty nature of the one and the, what, dark humour, shall we say, of the other as they wait to be served. On the ship, it really was like a Christmas wonderland. And these gingerbread houses were an absolute marvel. We weren't allowed to eat them because we stayed there for a week or so as we went across. But, oh, every day we went to see these and joined the crowds looking at them. They were a real highlight of the way the ship was decorated. On Christmas Eve, I was surprised to see that we didn't actually do all that much on Christmas Day, but on Christmas Eve, that's when all the festivities were. People dressed up, like these two friends that we made who were very, very proud of their jackets and wanted to be photographed with them. A lady who agreed to pose for me, though she was a bit suspicious of why, but I wanted to get her that wonderful dress she's wearing. That's her standing outside the toilets, by the way, but I couldn't find anywhere else with space for her. So people dressed up, people were in a good mood. Everything was very, very enjoyable on it. The choir was formed. You might notice that when it starts, sort of bottom rightish, is a man in a suit kneeling down. He's the cruise director, who did, I must admit, a really good job. But you might wonder why he's looking at his watch when this gets going. On Christmas Day itself, there was a really nice, well-attended Christmas service, and the day, it couldn't have been better. I couldn't praise Viking highly enough for what happened over that Christmas, especially the chocolate buffet. All of that on there is made of chocolate. People were very, very orderly. They stampeded and stopped and looked, and were very, very well behaved, laying into the Christmas buffet. We were going to finish off the cruise in Miami. We'd had a wonderful time, we'd seen all sorts, and we wanted to have a real cultural highlight, just to, like the star on top of the tree. So we asked around, so where's the best place to go in Miami for a meal? And that'll fit in with the likes of us. Somewhere refined, somewhere cultured, somewhere where we can truly have an ethereal experience. And we were told you must go to, and we went to it, and this was it. Hooters. And that is exactly the atmosphere of it. We were shocked. And when we told our son where we'd been, he nearly fell off his chair with equal shock. He really enjoyed it. But you can see Sylvia's reaction. That's her hair in the bottom left-hand corner. She's trying to avoid the photograph. Didn't want anybody to know we'd been there. But that's where we ended up. And we sailed back from Miami, from the heat of Miami. And what a great holiday we'd had. Last slide, Albert. Here's our quiz from I Saw Three Ships. Where did they sail into? They sailed into Bethlehem. All the bells on earth shall ring, so it's bells. All the angels in heaven shall sing. And all the souls on earth shall sing. So there's the answers to the Christmas quiz. And that brings us to the end of our talk of Christmas at sea, our sort of Christmas annual. And with this, I'd like to wish you all the very, very best for Christmas and hope you have a wonderful, fulfilling time of it. Thank you.